Hello and welcome to Food Safety Fridays. My name's Simon Timperley from the International Food Safety and Quality Network. Welcome to this webinar, SQF Edition 9 and compressed air testing, what you need to know, with our good friend Erin Zimmerman from Trace Analytics. Good morning, Erin.
Hi, happy to be here.
It's great to have you along. And where are you joining us from today?
I'm joining everyone from Austin, Texas.
And the weather is?
The weather is beautiful. It's been raining all week, but the sun is shining today, and I'm looking forward to getting out and enjoying it this weekend.
Super. Right, ladies and gents, tell us where you're joining us from. Have you got your chat on, Erin, there? Can you see? Like South Africa.
Wow.
What have we got? Boston, Kansas.
Cool.
So we'll play the sponsor ads and we'll watch you say hello in the sidebar. So we'll be back in a couple of minutes.
All right, welcome everyone.
The world of food has changed a lot in the last 100 years. But one thing that doesn't change? Ensuring the quality and safe handling of food. No matter what changes are yet to come, we're proud to always be on our clients' side, shaping the future of food today and tomorrow. AIB International, ever onward.
Oh, all right. Everyone hear me? Good morning. All right, I'm going to get started here with our SQF Edition 9 web presentation about testing your compressed air and those updates. Thank you all for joining me today to discuss the new release of SQF Edition 9 that is coming out May 24th of this year. Today I'm going to talk about how that will affect testing your compressed air specifically. My name is Erin Zimmerman, and I'm the Customer Service and Sales Manager at Trace Analytics. Trace Analytics is one of the leaders in testing compressed air and gas systems, and I am proud to be a part of it. At Trace, we pride ourselves in customer service and thought this would be a great opportunity to talk about the new SQF Edition and discuss what that means for you and testing your compressed air and gas systems. As I mentioned before, the new Edition 9 release date is right around the corner, which is May 24th to be exact. Today, I'm going to talk about meeting those compressed air requirements and how we at Trace can help you set up or update your monitoring plans. Some of the major industries that will be impacted are food, pet food, animal feed production, supplements, storage, and food packaging. Overall, I believe these updates will ultimately be beneficial to these industries because they have made some of the requirements a little more clear, whereas in the past, I'm sure a lot of you have found them to be a little vague or left up for interpretation. Specifically, this is what SQF Edition 9 says when it comes to testing compressed air and gases for manufacturing. I always feel like it's super important to share this with our customers so you can prepare yourselves and know what is expected of you if you choose to be compliant with SQF. 11.5.5.1 says that compressed air or other gases like nitrogen or carbon dioxide that come in contact with food or food contact surfaces shall be clean and present no risk to safety. 11.5.5.2 says that compressed air systems and systems used to stop or dispense other gases that come into contact with food contact surfaces shall be maintained regularly monitored for quality and applicable food safety hazards. The frequency of analysis shall be risk-based and at a minimum of tested annually. These next few slides, I also thought it was important to show these industries what SQF says in regards to you specifically. You will notice that they're very close when it comes to the wording for food manufacturing, food storage, distribution, and food packaging, but familiarizing yourself with what is required of you will always prove to be invaluable when preparing for your audits. Compressed air systems and systems used to store or dispense other gases in food storage distribution processes shall be maintained regularly and monitored for quality and applicable food safety hazards. Frequency of analysis shall be risk-based and at a minimum of annually. And here's for packaging, which as you can tell is pretty similar to the slides before, but I always feel it's important to share with you guys. All right, so as mentioned in the previous slides, everything is risk-based. So the first step in something we always recommend to our customers, new and old, is performing a risk assessment to help you determine the best course of action for your specific manufacturing process. At Trace, we have created a handy risk assessment checklist to help our customers get started. And our risk assessment checklist was designed to help our customers walk through their facilities and identify key areas and materials used in their compressor systems that could become problem areas or pose the most risk for future contamination of particles, water, oil, and microorganisms. These could be things like pipings, fittings, hoses, dryers, and chemicals used in the manufacturing process. We offer this risk assessment checklist to all of our customers. So if please feel free to reach out to our customer service or sales teams, and we'll be happy to send this to you to help you get started. Always a frequently asked question, and probably the first and most important step in your monitoring plan is deciding when and how often to test. SQF Edition 9 states that the frequency of testing shall be risk-based and at a minimum annually. We at Trace consider annual testing to be the bare minimum you can do to ensure the overall health of your compressed air system. Annual testing can end up leaving you with more questions than answers because, for example, if your annual test comes back with contamination, it becomes extremely hard to be able to pinpoint where, when, and why this has occurred. Whenever asked, I always recommend a quarterly testing schedule for all of our customers because over time, this will begin to show you patterns in outside forces that could be affecting your compressed air systems, like weather and production. I find quarterly is the most helpful because if there is a problem, you can address it quickly before contaminants could have been introduced into your product. After performing your risk assessment, you may feel like you have more questions than answers, but at Trace we've thought of this too. All of our sales and customer service representatives are ready and prepared to help you answer all of your questions and guide you down the right path. Questions like, what specifications do I test to? What limits do I choose? And how many points should I be sampling? Should all be determined as a part of your monitoring plan. By using our monitoring plan as a guide, our customers can make it their own. It is important to keep in mind that because compressed air systems are dynamic and ever-changing, your monitoring plans will also need to be updated to account for things like maintenance and seasonal changes throughout the year to ensure the overall health of your system. This is what SQF says about monitoring plans. A program that includes particle, water, oil, microorganisms, and gases in compressed air and other gases. A verification of effectiveness of compressor maintenance and filtration a management facility has in place. All this to say that there is no one-size-fits-all for monitoring plans, and each is going to be unique to you and your facility and your specific uses of compressed air and gas. At Trace, we also have a monitoring plan article that we're happy to share with our customers. As mentioned before, you have options when it comes to how often you should test. SQF only requires a minimum of annually, but in order to get the full picture, we at Trace always recommend quarterly to minimize surprises. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to customers who are disappointed in their sample results when their sample results come back and show that contamination is present, who only do the bare minimum of annual testing. It becomes really, really hard to try and pinpoint where and when the problem occurred, especially for how long it's been going on. Panic can start to set in when you're unsure of how much product could have been sent to distribution and could have been potentially contaminated. Another thing to consider is how many samples you should be taking. This is also determined on your individual compressed air systems, and when asked, we always recommend a percentage of your points of contact and a few throughout the facility. For example, if you're only testing at the end points of use or a single, and there is a problem, it is almost impossible to determine where the contaminants could have been being introduced into your system. Whereas if you're sampling at the compressor, points of filtration, and your endpoints of use, you at least have a starting off point to find the sources if there is contamination. We also recommend sampling before and after any scheduled or non-scheduled maintenance because by opening up your distribution piping, you are absolutely exposing the compressor to contaminants from the ambient air in your facility. Depending on what kind of maintenance you're doing, you could also be creating particles from things like metal shavings or construction dust. Here we have some examples of industry standards when choosing the right ISO 8573-1 purity classes for your product. As you saw before, SQF leaves it up to you to determine as the manufacturer what is best for your application. You could, after performing a risk assessment, you could determine whether your product is high risk, medium to low risk, or no risk. Some companies may have corporate guidelines they want all of their facilities to follow. If you've talked with your quality department and there is nothing specifically mentioned in your SOPs, you can always perform a diagnostic test. Our diagnostic test shows you where you fall within the ISO 8573-1 purity class chart and is not a pass-fail test. This sampling package has proven to be very helpful, especially for new customers that are just getting started with their monitoring plans. And here we have the ISO 8573 purity class chart. This is how the purity class chart breaks down the limits and purity classes. If you haven't yet familiarized yourself with the purity class chart, it can be a little daunting at first, but rest assured that our teams of experts can help you make sense of it all. We also have a nifty purity class calculator at our website that is a customer favorite. When asked, I always like to think of the ISO 8573-1 purity class chart as the common language when talking about testing your compressed air and gases and understanding the industry standards. The four major contaminants of compressed air are particles, water, oil, and microorganisms. I always like to picture the four contaminants as a group of supervillains in the live-action compressed air testing saga. They're a little scary at first, but rest assured that with continuous monitoring and testing, they can and will be defeated. A third-party lab like Trace Analytics can help your technicians troubleshoot your systems if they're having trouble finding the sources of contamination. At Trace, we have years of experience with working with our customers and can help you try to troubleshoot possible sources of contamination. But ultimately, because we're not there with you, it really does come down to you and your teams to find the source of contamination and remove it if present from your systems. Now, this is not to say that we would ever leave you in the lurch, because at Trace, we prioritize customer service above all else. But involving your maintenance and quality departments becomes critical, because these are the people who really know the ins and outs of your compressed air systems. This brings to mind a customer I worked very closely with this year that had only been doing a minimum of annual testing. Their sample report from 2020 came back perfectly clean, and they were able to meet the 221 specification limits they had set for themselves. But when it came time to test again, their 2021 sample report had failed, and they could not figure out why. After many phone calls and emails back and forth, it finally came out that they had performed some major construction at the end of 2020, which is believed to be the root cause of the particle contamination they were now seeing in their sample results from 2021. If they had been doing a quarterly or maintenance-based testing schedule, they would have been able to identify and address the particles early on and not had to stop production of their product. Okay, now we have particles. Particles can become a huge problem and are often hard times to get rid of. Black iron piping is probably the worst offender when it comes to shedding particles, and it And we know it may not be feasible for you to replace the piping throughout your facility, so it is vital to know what kind of piping you have in order to take proper precautions when selecting filters for your end points of use. Other materials such as unions, valves, tape, solder, sealings, and O-rings can also cause shedding of particles that can be introduced into your system. These materials need to be replaced regularly as normal aging of the materials occurs. And for sources of contamination for water, I always like to remind everyone that water vapor is all around us in the ambient air we breathe and can be introduced to your system by tubing because it's permeable and can sometimes leak. Knowing what kinds of dryers you have and their capabilities is the first step in monitoring water in your system. Filtration must be monitored regularly to ensure it's doing its job by removing the excess moisture of your system. Condensation is another thing you need to be on the lookout for because it can pool and trap in drops or bends in the piping. Condensation is also going to be affected by temperature and pressure, so monitoring throughout the year is going to help you keep track of your system and stay on top of the outside sources like weather that may affect it. So water can also be a little bit tricky because it's not just isolated to itself. It can lead to corrosion, which can then lead to particles from rust, and it can also provide the perfect breeding ground for microorganisms to grow within your system. Next, we have oil. And oil aerosol or oil mist, as some of you may have heard of it referred to in the past, can also pose a problem if not properly monitored. Because no one wants to have oil in their end product, things to look out for are maintaining your filtration traps. Also, you want to monitor materials like hoses, fittings, and also products like lubricants and cleaning agents you may be using in your facilities regularly. Oil vapor or volatile hydrocarbons exist at some extent as a vapor at normal temperatures and pressures. Oil vapor can be introduced into your product by ineffective filtration or from your intake air from fuels, solvents, exhaust, and chemicals you might be using in your facility daily. Cleaning agents or lubricants may also be used on a day-to-day basis can contribute to oil vapor contamination. So being aware that these could become introduced to your system as oil vapor from the intake is the first step to ensuring it doesn't contaminate your product. Total oil is something that ISO 8573-1 requires for purity classes 1 and 2. And it is something that sets Trace Analytics apart from our competitors. What we do is take your oil aerosol and your oil vapor results and combine them on your final report in a section that is called Total Oil. Monitoring them both will help you stay in compliant with ISO 8573-1 and help you pass your SQF audits. I believe that breaking down the two into these two categories is exceptionally helpful for our customers because it gives you a better idea of what and where the contamination of oil could be coming from. I think that most customers tend to think of oil as, a liquid that we put into our engines, a greasy black substance, but oil vapor is sometimes forgotten. Microbial contamination is probably the most infamous of the contaminants because this is the one that makes the papers when it becomes an issue. I'm sure you've all heard and seen, when there is a listeria outbreak and huge recalls are set in place. Although microorganisms are all around us and even in the air we breathe, too many of certain types can be harmful, especially for food manufacturers if passed to your end users. Hands down, the best thing you can do for microbial contamination is monitor your systems and monitor them often. Humans are the #1 source of microcontamination, so stressing the importance of aseptic procedures to your staff and ensuring that they are being followed will save you in the long run. At Trace, we provide our customers with instructions and videos that we have available to anyone online that really stress the importance of aseptic procedures when collecting your micro samples. And now that you know what you should be looking for as far as contaminants, the next step is testing. Also, something that is unique to Trace Analytics is our tailored analysis packages designed specifically to meet all of our customers' needs. We have a basic, a value, and a pro package, all in compliance with ISO 8573-1 and based off of the purity class chart. So another thing when selecting which package is best for you, you'll notice that in the previous slides, we talked about industry standards and determining whether you're high, medium, or low risk. So once you've performed your risk assessment, you'll have a better idea of what package is best for you. Our customer service and sales teams can also help you find what package is best that works for you, or they can even help you customize something that meets your specific needs. As I mentioned before, we have a diagnostic package that is great for customers who haven't yet determined what purity classes they should be testing to. This package will meet your SQF requirements and is not a pass-fail test. This package will simply show you where you fall within the ISO 8573-1 purity class chart. So you can think of it as kind of like a starting off point in determining where you should go moving forward. We also have packages for micro too. The basic is great because it'll help you pass your SQF audit, but it's only going to tell you the total plate count of potential microbial growth. Whereas the Pro package is also going to provide a total plate count and gram staining. Gram staining is the first step in organism identification. We can also do further identification if your results come back with microbial growth, and I encourage all of our food manufacturers to ask about adding this to your next quote. Knowing what types of organisms you may have in your systems is really the only way you can truly ensure your end products are safe for consumption. So these are things like Listeria, E. coli, Salmonella, these are all things that we can help you guys identify if, you do happen to have micro growth. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit more about products. Here we have our K810 Air Check Kit for testing particles, water, and oil. It's simple and easy to use. We also have easy to follow instructions and videos that walk our customers through assembly and sampling times. Your sampling times are going to be based off of the analysis package you choose and or the purity classes you're trying to meet. This kit does have some limitations when it comes to particle size ranges, but for the most part, our K810 Air Check kit meets about, I would say, 90%, 90 plus of our customers' needs for testing particles, water, and oil. And for our customers out there with the most strict particle size ranges, range specifications, we also have 2 different laser particle counters available for purchase or rent. They can be used for testing particles in compressed air systems and ambient for all of you folks with clean rooms and clean room specifications. I typically only recommend renting one of our LPCs or laser particle counters if you have specification limits that require you to test down to 0.1 to 0.5 micron size range per the ISO 8573-1 purity class chart. The LPCs are also great to use as a tool for troubleshooting difficult to find particle contamination because the handheld unit is easy to use and you can take as many samples as you'd like during the rental period. This also reminds me of a customer I worked closely with last year to help find the source of their particle contamination. They had been struggling to consistently meet their particle limits to pass their SQF audit. I suggested they rent one of our laser particle counters, and with a little work on their part, they were able to find and locate the source of particle contamination because they were able to take multiple samples throughout their facility and locate the source of the problem. The laser particles are also great because, as you can see in these images we have, you get instant results. So you can see in real time the readings of non-viable particles. Because SQF requires not only that your compressed air is tested, but also states that gases coming into contact with food and food contact surfaces are monitored, we have our super easy to use K802 Pure Gas Air Check Kit that can be partnered easily alongside the K810 for particles, water, and oil. This is the easiest kit to use because, as you can see, there are no flow meters, there's no chart, and no real sampling times. It's just an adapter that hooks up easily to your sampling port and a source bottle that collects the gas. This kit can test the purity of gases used in your manufacturing, and it can also meet most gas specifications you may already have set in place at your facility. Either way, the results and analysis can be included into your pricing package and, of course, onto your final report. And finally, and my personal favorite, we have the Pinocchio 2 Micro Impaction Sampler that we use for testing microorganism growth in your compressed air and gas systems. After setup, the sampling time is only 10 minutes per plate and 10 seconds for your control before and after blind test. The blind tests are simply there just to ensure that the any potential growth on your sample plate is true to your compressed air system and was not accidentally contaminated by the person collecting the sample. We also offer beautifully designed and easy to follow sampling instructions and videos for the equipment that, of course, stress the importance of aseptic procedure to ensure that samples are collected properly and not contaminated by the technician. We are typically able to ship this equipment within a week or two, so scheduling your sampling dates with your sales or customer service rep as soon as possible is recommended to ensure availability. One of the biggest changes that affects our industry for the new SQF Edition 9 is the introduction of ambient air, and we at Trace have you covered there too. We now offer ambient and environmental testing and are very, very excited to introduce this to our customers. So whether you are new or old, please be sure to ask about ambient and environmental testing so we can include that on your next quote. As you can see here, we also have two separate packages for environmental analysis. They're the same as what you saw before for the microbial testing. We have the basic and the pro. The sampling times are a little bit different for environmental, and the turnaround times are also a little bit shorter. So and what I mean by turnaround times is from the day we receive your sample to the day you get your final report emailed to you. All right. Well, thank you guys. This concludes my time today. Thank you all for joining me to talk about the new SQF Edition 9, which will be released May 24th of 2021, and how we at Trace can help you meet your SQF requirements when it comes to testing your compressed air and gases for particles, water, oil, and microbial. We love our customers at Trace Analytics, and our #1 goal after providing you with clear and accurate results is helping our customers through their individual compressed air testing journeys. So please don't hesitate to reach out to our sales team today. We know that testing your compressed air systems is only a small part of everything you do to ensure safe, quality food, but it is literally everything to us. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Erin. Let's get rid of the slides. And are you ready for some questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
Always.
Right, then the first one is from, let me see if I can get that up. From Srinivasulu. Is it required to test for oil contaminants for compressed air generated using oil-free compressors?
Yes. So at Trace, we get this question quite a bit. And I completely understand why. Why would you need to test for oil if you have an oil-free compressor? And so what I usually do is I talk to those customers about oil vapor, because oil vapor can also be introduced into your system from your intake air. So it's not necessarily generated from your compressor, but it could be being pulled in from outside sources. Depending on where your intake air is, it could be sucking in things like fuels and solvents. It just kind of depends on the facility and what's going on inside.
Okay, very good. And Mr. Chawafon, if we use nitrogen for flushing air in the product before sealing, should we be testing?
Yes, absolutely. You're not only going to want to test that the nitrogen you're using is at the percentage that it needs to be for your specific use, but also that the nitrogen is not being contaminated from the compressed air system. So we know that gases can also carry the contaminants like particles, water, and oil, and sometimes even microorganisms. So that's why I wanted to talk about our pure gas air check kit that can be partnered along with the particles, water, and oil.
Okay, thank you. And are there micron limits for the blower filter conveying wheat flour? Is that relevant?
Okay, so yeah, so SQF doesn't specify exact limits. Everything is risk-based. So basically it comes down to you as the manufacturer to determine what is acceptable for your use and for your end product. So depending on, the blow filter, what is things to consider, I guess what I'm trying to say is what is happening after that step. I've worked with many manufacturers who are concerned about microbial growth, and then after performing a risk assessment, they determined that because they have a kill step, that's how they're kind of able to determine what is acceptable for their use. So it's hard to it's not a one size fits all, but after performing a risk assessment, you have a better idea of what's going on in your facility.
Okay, and Abdi, again, is there a reference for determining hand swabs, equipment, services, and air in wheat flour industry? It's not relevant to compressed air, that is it? I think that's just more environmental.
But we do environmental, and we do offer those swabs, which is something that is new to us and we're really excited about. But as far as documents that determine where and when you should be testing those, the most I've heard is the swabs are great to be used for, hand or smaller surfaces that are maybe hard to get to, but are also touched on a regular basis. So the results for those are either going to be yes or no. So it's either you have microorganisms or not.
Okay, and one from George. Compressed air checks. Can compressed air checks be done by a non-accredited lab?
They can, but your final results aren't going to have that accreditation stamp on it. So if you choose to go with a non-accredited lab, you're going to have to be prepared in your next audit. They're going to ask why you chose a lab that was not accredited, and you just don't really have that assurance or confidence. So when you are searching for labs, I would recommend using an accredited one.
Yeah, definitely. And Srin Vasulu again, any recommendation for in-house monitoring plan for microbial contaminants in compressed air?
Yeah, so the SQF requirements only state that it needs to be a risk-based monitoring plan and at a minimum of annually. When I hear customers say we're only going to test annually, I always try and recommend that they do at least, semi-annually or quarterly, because a year, there's just too much that can go on in 1 year. And so if you do have microbial growth in your sample, you really don't have enough information to be able to try and figure out where and when that may have started, and it may be too late.
Okay, and Keith, pathogen testing for compressed air lines that are PMED biannually. PMED.
Compressed air lines that maybe a pharmaceutical med biannually.
Shall we?
I'm not quite sure.
Ankitha, yeah, if you can just sort of make your question a little bit clearer, Ankitha, if that's possible, please.
Yeah, I would definitely like to get back to you though.
Abdi, test for particles for what raw material or what?
So at Trace Analytics, you're testing for all particles. So that could be from anywhere. It could be from dust, it could be from rust from the piping, it could be from metal shavings after maintenance or construction. So the sources of particle contamination are almost limitless. So knowing that they're there is the first step in being able to identify what they are and how to get them out.
Okay, Evelyn, in an SQF packaging operation, where do you test the air if it's only a small 1/8 ID tube blowing on the label to hold it down on the outfeed print conveyor?
Okay, so that kind of sounds like it would be your end point of use, which I do recommend you test because that would be coming in either direct or indirect contact with whatever your product might be. And at Trace Analytics, we offer all of our fittings are a 1/4 inch MPT, which is a universal fitting. So you may have to do a little bit on your part to try and find a fitting that is a 1/4 inch that will also work with your end point of use.
Okay, Mendez, which pathogens should we look for in compressed air lines?
That's a good question. And it's definitely something that, first step, I recommend doing a risk assessment. It depends on what your end product is, so what you're manufacturing. Big ones for food and pharmaceuticals are things like Listeria, Salmonella, E. coli, but we also test for um, fungi and yeast. So it it it's not a one size fits all, but those are some big ones because those are the ones that could end up making people sick.
Okay, Miss, can you rent these sampling tools or do you have to buy them?
Oh, yep. So we offer both for all of our equipment is available for either purchase or rent. So, we have customers that do both. Depending on how often they're sampling, they may choose to purchase the equipment so that it's easier. They can keep it on hand. But if you want to reach out to our sales team, they'll be happy to provide you with pricing. And then that way you can take that back to your team and you guys can decide what is best for you.
Yeah. Okay, that clears George's question because he was asking about the cost as well. So best
Yeah.
thing to do is in the follow-up email, we'll have the contact details so you can just reach out and find out everything you need to know about renting, buying costs, etc.
Yeah.
Fernando, do you know if there have been any FDA or other recalls that have actually got to the root cause of being compressed air contaminants?
So I don't know of any off the top of my head, but as you'll see in the papers, when there is a recall, it's Listeria. It's E. coli. It's one of those big scary ones that makes people sick. And a lot of times people don't really think that those kinds of organisms could be living in your compressed air system. So our goal is for you to be able to test and clear your mind, knowing that your compressed air system is clean and free of those contaminants. Because they may start from, say the conveyor belt where the raw materials are, but then it can spread throughout the entire facility and definitely get into your compressed air system.
Okay, and Jill, is there an acceptable CFU microcount, or is any growth a failure? Is there an acceptable levels?
Yeah, so what that also comes down to your risk assessment, but basically you don't want to see any growth. We do have customers who have internal limits that they've set, maybe depending on how many CFUs they have found to be acceptable, but it's not a one size fits all. So it's not, there's no just straight answer for that, unfortunately.
Okay, and Mohan, rapid microbiological testing, does it give, is it a rapid result system, or does it take time?
Yeah, so the micro because they're living organisms, is not a rapid test. You would have to collect the samples at your facility using our contact plates. Those need to be then shipped back to us, which we then incubate at our laboratory. And the reason we have to incubate them, that is based off of the ISO specifications. So ISO requires certain temperatures and times at which these you need to check to see if anything is able to grow, and that's how we determine your results. Typically, turnaround time for that, the incubation time is 10 days. But we also do custom because we work with many facilities that may have their own internal specifications. So incubation times and temperatures.
Okay, thanks. Fernando, why can't we use the old standby air settling plates technique? It's not perfect, but will it satisfy SQF?
Yeah, so we also offer the settling plates at Trace Analytics. The settling plates is great for testing environmental and the ambient air, right? Because microorganisms are all around us. And so you definitely want to be aware of what is floating around in the air and what could potentially come in contact with your food. But the equipment that I showed earlier, which is the Pinocchio 2 impaction sampler, is specifically designed to test to see what is coming from your compressed air. And if you're talking about taking your compressed air and blowing it on a plate, that is also another way you can check for microbial growth. But the reason why the impaction sampler is better is because you know specifically how much air is being sampled at that given time, whereas with the spray method you don't know, so it's harder to quantify.
Okay, Dr. Ranju, can we use the bubbling method to check the microbial quality of air? Bubbling method involves the passing of air by BPW buffer peptone water. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, so I've only heard of this, but I am unfortunately not familiar with it enough to answer your question. I will be happy to take that question to our microbiologist, who is also on the board of ISO, and get that answered for you.
Okay, and Roland, is there a standard volume of air for testing compressed air for microbial contaminants? Do you know?
Yeah, so if you're renting the Pinocchio impaction sampler, we have sampling instructions that break down the volume of air and the sample time. So what we have it broken down to is based off of the volume, the sample time, and the liters of flow per minute. So liters of air per minute.
Okay. Mohan, by using these instruments, can we get NABL accreditation? NABL.
That's a really good question, Mohan. I'm not familiar with NABL off the top of my head, but I would be happy to look that up for you and get back to you with an answer.
NABL, I think, is an Indian accredited laboratory.
Oh, okay.
I just Googled it.
Cool. Good old Google, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's definitely a question I would like to take back to our quality department and just cross-reference what we do and our accreditation here at Trace Analytics with what NABL requires.
Okay, great. Ishmael, what are the critical limits for microorganisms in ambient air? Do you?
So I don't. So I think it would depend on what standard he's trying to meet. But if he is trying to meet SQF, which is what we're talking about here today, all that SQF states is that your monitoring program needs to be risk-based. So that's why I always stress the importance of performing a risk assessment. So that way you guys can determine what is best for your final end product and application.
Okay, and Tijan, we use nitrogen to cool exposed products, and normally we receive a COA per each nitrogen lot. Do we have to perform any tests?
Any testing? Okay. So yeah. So what we do, and we work with many customers who also, they're purchasing their nitrogen that they use in production from somewhere else, and so what they come to us for at Trace Analytics is a third-party verification process. So by using our lab to test the purity of the nitrogen, they can then go back and compare it to be absolutely sure that what they're getting is what is necessary for their manufacturing process.
Okay, and Irina, hello, we are not able to put a Petri plate to collect a sample of compressed air due to the equipment structure. What are the alternatives?
Okay, so one alternative would be to rent the impaction sampler that we offer. So we don't use Petri plates. We used their TSA contact plates. They're similar, and they're designed specifically to fit in the funnel head of that equipment. So we provide both the plates and the sampling equipment to do so. Are not able to collect. Yeah, so I guess in order to fully answer your question, I would need to know what type of equipment you're using. But just off the top of my head, alternatives would be using a settle plate. So the contact plates that we offer can be used as settle plates or contact plates, where you can actually take them and test surfaces. You can also use the swabs that we provide to test surfaces as well.
Okay, and Theo, we use nitrogen and carbon dioxide in rice fumigation. Do we need to test our product for residues?
Yeah, I would definitely recommend testing the gases that you use in your production lines because, like I said, they might be starting out at the purity limits that you need and free and clean of contaminants. But what can happen is going through the piping and the distribution to get to the rice, that's where the gas can pick up those kinds of contaminants. So, things for like particles from the piping, oils from the compressor, water just from condensation, from temperature changes. So making sure that by the time it's getting to your product, it's as clean as it was starting out.
Okay, great. Adam, what is the best way to determine what particle, water and oil limits are the most appropriate for our facility from looking at a chart like you showed earlier?
Okay. Yeah. So I think, Adam, it sounds like you're actually on the right path. You're looking at the purity class chart. So determining what what limits to set for your facility. I would love to be able to send you the risk assessment checklist and our monitoring plans article. Both of those are going to help you and ask yourself and your facility the right questions in order to be able to determine what limits are best for you. So questions like, does the compressed air or gas come in direct or indirect contact with the food? Is there a kill step afterwards? So yeah, I'd be really excited to send those over to you and help you get started.
Okay, brilliant. Jolise, will testing compressed air on individual machinery be sufficient to justify the overall compressed air quality of our facility? About 10 machines tested out of 50.
Yeah, so what it sounds like to me, what you're talking about is doing a percentage. And so that I think that's a great plan. It's definitely something we recommend to our customers. But a key thing in doing a percentage plan is changing it up each time. So, let's say you have 50, you're going to test 10 at a time. So each time you would want to mix it up with a different 10. And then over the course of 5 rounds of testing, you would get all 50. And then you could make sure that, they're all being monitored continuously.
Yeah, and that's the same question really from Mark about multiple points of use testing. Do you need to test all? But
yeah,
you move the samples around basically. Okay, Franklin, do we need to look for a testing from our packaging suppliers, specifically those who conduct blow types of packaging, so blown films?
Yeah. So that is a big reason why a lot of packaging suppliers do test. It's because their customers, or you, Franklin, want to be sure that the packaging they're providing you is safe for your product. So if you're a customer of theirs, I don't see anything wrong with asking them those types of questions.
Yeah. Dr. H.J. Shankralingi Gowda, sorry for the poor pronunciation. Can we get these equipments in India? If so, where? How far do trace go?
Yes. Yeah. So we have customers across the globe. So we ship everywhere. We're happy to work with any customers in any countries. We just have to, the only thing that becomes a little bit tricky is the testing for microbials. And it is because those contact plates are so time sensitive, right? Because as soon as the, microbes hit the plate, they start growing. So we like to be able to get them back and sampled as soon as possible. So that has limited us before in the past, but we are looking to expand our microbial testing worldwide too. So.
Okay, and Patricia, is it acceptable just to do microbial testing for SQF audit?
So testing microbial is only part of it because SQF specifically talks about particles, water, and oil. It sounds like a lot, but we have many customers who schedule both sampling at the same time. I personally myself have even gone to a facility and helped customers test. That's not something we do on a normal basis, but depending on where you're located if you are in the United States, we also work with distributors who are happy to use our equipment and take that to your facility. But if you are trying to meet SQF, you do need to be testing for all 4 contaminants, which is particles, water, and oil, and microorganisms.
Okay. Mike, is it also required by FDA to test compressed air annually?
So FDA is a little bit more vague. I believe they only talk about monitoring plans specifically, but I don't know off the top of my head if they have anything in there that states, whether it needs to be tested annually or quarterly, or what even you should be looking for.
Okay.
But I know that they do state you need to make sure that it's safe. So
sure. Mark, what type of filter is sufficient at the point of use to satisfy BRC?
So unfortunately, I am not a filter specialist, but I'd be happy to send you our risk assessment checklist and hopefully get some good answers for you. Filters are tricky because it really depends on what type of compressor you're using, the age of the system. It depends on if you have refrigerant or desiccant dryers. So those are all things that that play into selecting the best ones.
Okay, great. A number of people have requested the risk assessment checklist.
Wonderful.
And I know Jenny's emailed me already.
Yep, she's on top of it.
With a link to it. So we will definitely include a direct link to the risk assessment checklist in the follow-up email.
Yes, absolutely. And I'd hope to get a list of questions as well for all of the ones that we don't have time to answer today.
Sure. I'll do that. Yeah. I think one more, as far as I can see. Shahid, is it required to meet BRC? So we've SQF, FDA, BRC.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So we do work with lots of customers who are trying to meet BRC requirements, and BRC is actually my favorite because they're the only one that does specify what limits you should be testing to. So I believe for the BRC, if you determine that your compressed air or gas is coming in direct contact with your final product, I believe they recommend you test for a class 2 for particles, a 2 for water, and 1 for oil. And that's based off of the ISO purity class chart. And indirect, I believe, is a 2-4-2. So for particles, water, and oil. Great question.
Brilliant. Yeah, and I've skipped over them, but there's been quite a few comments saying thanks very much for great presentation, etc.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, everyone who joined.
Another question, actually.
Okay, yeah.
Patricia, during our risk assessment, is it necessary to include points before filters for water, oil, and particles?
So yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't see why not, especially that's going to tell you what's going on before, right? And then if you're testing before the filtration and after, then you're going to have a full picture of whether your filtration system is actually doing what it's supposed to. And so that's really helpful information to know, especially for charting and mapping out how often, your filters and that filtration system needs to be kept up with.
Brilliant. Right, I think we've done it. We've gone over by 9 minutes, but doesn't matter.
Lots of questions.
Exactly, that's what we like. That's what we're here for. So yeah, very much appreciate your time today, Erin.
Well, thank you for having me.
I hope to see you again, and have a great weekend.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.
Okay, everybody, that's Erin Zimmerman from Trace Analytics. Thanks for engaging today, everybody. You've made it a very enjoyable and informative webinar. Lots of questions, fantastic. In the sidebar now is your certificate of attendance that you can download. You can print and sign it yourself or open it in image editing software such as Paint and type your name. We can't personalize them for you. In an hour or so, we'll follow up with an email with the slides, certificate again, and the webinar recording, and that link to the risk assessment template. So thanks once again. Friday. Enjoy the rest of your day and have a